Right, things seem to have settled down a bit now. We seem to have quite a lot of people joined us already. I'm Gail Orr, I'm the secretary of the Switch Forum. And my day job, I work in the SHEC team for BioCapital, which is a company that does anaerobic digestion mainly. So welcome everyone to today's webinar with Tim Small. And this is our busiest webinar yet, to which credit goes to Tim, I think, for being the attraction there. The webinar is due to run for an hour and a half. We are recording it today, so if you don't want your picture seen, then if you could just turn your camera off. The presentation will be issued to everyone who's registered after the event. And if you could keep yourself on mute during the presentation, if you could put questions in the chat box, we'll catch up with the questions and answers at the end. And you will have an opportunity to put your hand up and ask questions at the end of the presentation. So just a little bit about the Switch Forum first. It's a Scottish Waste Industry Training, Competence and Health and Safety Forum. If you want to, it's free to sign up to join the Switch Forum, and you'll get updated on all the webinars that we're running. It's on switchforum.org.uk. If you want to sign up, go and have a look at the website. We keep it up to date with news and various links to guidance and so on. So basically we try and help out all sizes and shapes of businesses, keeping up to date with the waste industry aspects of training, competence and health and safety. So there's a lot of good information coming through, so check out the website. So today we have Tim Small, who is the lead for the waste industry and the health and safety executive. Tim's going to give us an update on the inspection, enforcement and sector engagement for the HSE in the waste sector today. Tim's been doing that for a wee while now, so I'm sure he'll update you himself. So at this point, I will hand over to Tim for the presentation. Thanks, Tim.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Gail. Right. Okay. So, yeah, I thought before we start, touch a little bit about my background. Sorry, that's it. Great, thank you. Because it does inform a little bit of my thinking. So I started off in HSE doing engineering, then moved to health services. I've done construction. I spent a year on the Hatfield train crash investigation, which was a really fascinating. Gave me a lot of insight into kind of culture and also how kind of financial decisions can impact on safety. So that was really interesting. I spent quite a lot of time in gas and pipelines. Again, that was really interesting. Some parallels there between Railtrack, Aswas and Transco. More recently, I moved into human factors in our major hazards division, and as the slide says, I'll come back to that at the end. But I'm not sure how many of you are kind of aware of human factors, but it's a particular way of looking at tasks, individuals, organizations, environments, etc. So it's kind of a systems-based thing. It's not the easiest of concepts to get your head around, but elements of it like competence and procedures, etc., you'll all be familiar with. But as I said, I'll come back to that at the end, and I'll also pick up on a few bits of it as we go through. The idea is to get you to go away from this and kind of have a little bit of a think about stuff as well. So yeah, and the last point there, I've been in this sector role since September 2020. So I've kind of learned, it's been a pretty steep learning curve, but it's a really fascinating sector, particularly given what's going on with net zero and you know, attempts to decarbonize the economy, and so I'll pick up on some of that as we go through. Okay, next slide, please. So I thought we'd I'll just have a quick run through about how HSE kind of regulates the sector. There's quite a few strands to it. Stakeholder engagement obviously is one of the big ones. That's our outward facing the way that we deal with stakeholders. We also use targeted inspection, which we try to drive on the basis of intelligence. So that's not just accidents and incidents, etc., but it's also, for example, talking to other regulators like EA, who will visit all of any sites which are processing waste. Obviously, everybody will be familiar with the enforcement angles. That's improvement notices, prohibition notices, prosecutions. We also work with external stakeholders, and internally we also have a scientific resource to commission research. So there's yesterday I sat in a meeting to do with a sort of pan-European initiative, which is looking at risk assessment in relation to chemicals, and so that goes across Europe, but it also goes across lots of sectors. So I'll be kind of sat in on that. So I've just highlighted a few of the organisations that we work in partnership with. So obviously there's WISH, so that's south of the border. Hopefully you're all familiar with that. WISH is where a lot of our guidance now sits. And I think it's been a very successful body. Obviously, yourselves north of the border, kind of an analogous role. There's probably more scope for us to do more with yourselves, but also with the bodies listed below. I think, COVID has really driven a coach and horses through a lot of work that was going on, and we're really in the position of trying to get it back again. Okay, so we've got the Environmental Services Association, so they are representing the kind of larger players in the industry. We've got a couple of local authority organisations, LARAC and Laws. We need to kind of re-engage with them because they were understandably under lots of pressure during COVID as well. Another area which has kind of dropped off the radar a bit is other government departments. So EA, obviously fellow regulators, also NRW and SEPA, but also BEIS and DEFRA. And the significance of BEIS and DEFRA is that they are the ones who drive policy, and often we are kind of on the receiving end of that policy, and I would like us to be a bit more on the front foot with that. A good example of that where it didn't perhaps go as well as it could have done was anaerobic digestion, which a topic obviously Gail's very familiar with, and we're slightly playing catch up with that, but I think we're heading in the right direction there. Manufacturers, we do try to work with manufacturers because obviously if you can engineer problems out, design them out at source, then life gets a lot easier for everybody because you don't have to rely on PPE and so forth. So particular areas there where we're looking at, we're doing work is noise. That's partly just RCVs, but also in relation to a glass collection, which is particularly problematic. Visibility, we issued a safety notice last year about visibility with front loading shovels, etc., and also the importance of pedestrian segregation. And so there is another one, but I can't remember what it is. But anyway, so that's another important element. And there's other trade bodies like British Metals Recycling Association, UROC, REA and ADBA. Latter two relate to AD primarily. Okay, next slide. So really, we work very closely with Wish. There are 5 strategic themes. I've started slightly. Bullet point 1 there actually kind of puts 2 together. So that's the safer and healthier working place. That's where the bulk of a lot of the work that gets done by Wish takes place. And I'll come on to some of that a bit later on. Training and competence, obviously important, ongoing, a constant battle because people leave, new people come in, processes change, etc. So that's a very kind of long-standing issue. The next one, futures and innovation, is really what it says. It's all about trying to be on the front foot with things. I think across HSE there is a kind of recognition that that net zero and a lot of the emerging technologies for dealing with waste are going to can have the potential to profoundly change the way that we do things and also the way that we're organised as well. Last point down there is supporting SMEs. This is a really hard one. There are no magic bullets. I don't particularly have any answers from this from my previous time trying to do this kind of work. It's very difficult. So we have good roots into the kind of 40% of the industry represented by the large players, but the sort of 60% that are SMEs and micro businesses is much harder to do. Just a quick plug there for the Wish AGM, 14th, 15th September. That's at the NEC. So Wish AGMs, which I've not actually been to before, but I understand the format is that each of the working groups will run a session, and then there will be a kind of consultation with the audience, with those who are there to say, well, look, okay, this is our view on what we need to be doing here, but we need to take suggestions from you guys. But actually, very importantly, it's not just people making suggestions, it's also people stepping up and saying, I will do this, or I will offer X resource, because without that, it won't happen, because Wish is a volunteer organisation. And apart from me and the person who works for me and my team, everybody else has got day job to do. So we're doing it in the margins. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so that's just a quick plug for the website. It's a really good website if you haven't been to it. Lots of guidance on there. The strategy is on there. You can have a look at that. And yeah, it's a really good resource. Okay. Okay, so where are we now? I've already mentioned COVID. It's a huge issue. It's really reinforced the role of the sector in keeping the country running, but it was also a huge challenge for Wish, and Info 13, which covered COVID-19, and the supporting documents to that have been that were constructed. It predates my time, but thankfully, to be honest, because it sounded pretty pressurized, was put together at very short notice. It's been through about, I think, 10 different iterations, 9 or 10 different iterations. We've archived it now, but it's there. We can bring it back if we need to. So obviously waste and recycling is core to achieving net zero by 2050, and there's lots of new and emerging technologies, and I'll come back to a few of these as we go on. So I think the next point is a really important one to make. Previously recycling was something done by the waste industry. In other words, the industry would collect and dispose of waste, but now actually it's a concern for pretty much anybody who operates and manufactures things. So it's about what do you do with that waste and being innovative. So for example, in wood, you might have wood processing, so you'll have pet bedding, you'll have people making kind of briquettes to put on your fire. So people are looking creatively about what they can do with stuff that used to be sent to landfill. So I've highlighted the AD-ish sort of example there. This is a technology that we find in lots of different places, so breweries, food farms, wastewater treatment works, paper mills. There's probably others that I've kind of forgotten. So some of these technologies are not confined to one sector. Excuse me. You will find them, you know, in all sorts of areas. Right. Okay. Yeah, I mentioned safety notices, wheeled loaders. If anybody wants to have a look at that, there's the link. Honestly, this was a kind of 2-page document that was absolutely painful to get out the door because it was so complicated to write, to be legally correct and to be technically correct, and something that all the different parties could live with. Wheeled loaders are an interesting example of how the sector takes equipment or plant from other areas and applications and adapts it for use. And that's so in writing that safety notice, we had to take on board comments from a lot of people, not just waste people, but you know, quarries people, construction people, specialist mechanical engineers, etc. So it was quite the complicated thing to write. Okay, next slide. So in HSE parlance, waste and recycling is a high risk sector. So so these are the figures from our latest statistics. We tend to bundle them up in rolling 5-year averages because it's a bit more meaningful that way. I'm not going to read them all out. You can see them there, but you know, I think kind of salient point there: 17 times the all industry rate, and it's actually higher than agriculture and construction, which actually kill more people and injure more people, but they are bigger industries. So we've also got the ill health related cases. I should say those are from the LFS, the Labour Force Survey. They're not from Riddle. Riddle reporting of health related stuff is not high, and yeah, the LFS is the best that we've got. That's not exclusive to HSE. That's used across industry. Okay, and yeah, so there's a rough split there between public and private sector. Okay, next slide. If you're interested, you can go and have a look at those stats. That's the web. That's the web address. I think something that's not on the slides there, but I am trying to get a bit more clarity on at the moment. But a long time ago, way before my time, 20 odd years ago, typical numbers of fatalities a year were about 18 in the sector. Roughly, though it would fluctuate, but roughly about 18. And last year we had 3. So what I would like to do is to try to get a kind of 20-year trend line, as it were, to see where we're going, because I think, unlike agriculture and construction, I think, which have largely plateaued, I think we've actually got a better story to tell, as it were, and that's not just down to HSE, that's down to the whole of industry making a massive effort. Okay. So rather than just talking about statistics and kind of stuff like that, I thought I'd add a few case studies in here. So just to kind of make the stuff a bit more tangible for people. So this is one that came to court not that long ago. So 23-year-old injured in a mobile agricultural baler. So this was, as the slide says, it was designed for animal forage but used to bale materials for RDF. One of the issues with the industry, and because it's only really the recycling part of waste and recycling is comparatively recent, is that it's been very good at taking and adapting machinery from other sectors. The problem with that is that the guarding requirements, for example, for an agricultural baler used in the middle of a field, are probably likely to be significantly different for the same machine used in a constrained industrial environment. So in this case, the machine wasn't suitable. It couldn't handle the large rigid items, which meant there were frequent blockages. So the reference for machines being suitable there is pure Reg 4. So lots of exacerbating features, little training, no systems that safe systems of work or lock-off procedure, and effectively keeping the baler running became the employee's problem. Management really weren't that interested. I think issues have been raised, nothing had been done, and so it was down to the employees, and they felt that they had no choice but to try to keep it running. What it's not on the slide there is there were two balers, and one of the other balers was out of action, so on the day of the accident, so it was imperative that they kept this baler operating. And the accident itself, there was a blockage. 2 people were involved in unblocking it. So there was a relatively new and untrained worker who was helping to clear the blockage, and the rather more experienced worker was in the bale chamber at the time. And for reasons that are not particularly clear, the untrained operator operated or cycled the machine, and the guy in the bale chamber was tragically killed. I think, you know, one of the things about this particular example, it captures a lot of the issues that we face. So the use of adaptive machinery, the failure to lock off and isolate, the lack of understanding of what of how machines operate, and you know, how to actually go about intervening in a safe way. Okay, next one. So another area which causes a lot of issues is vehicle rollaway. In this particular one, this is 2014. So a driver left the RCV to collect refuse in a car park in Watford. So the important thing here is the handbrake was on. Driver working alone began to roll away, and the driver tried to re-enter the cab and was caught under the rear of the vehicle, which crashed into a tree, caught fire. Driver trapped for 90 minutes. So the driver trying to re-enter the cab is absolutely the classic reaction, and it's a really hard reaction to actually cope with, because it's human nature. I live at the top of a hill. I am now paranoid about putting the handbrake on my car because of having come across this, but there's also a number of videos available online which you can search up of RCVs rolling away, and it's deeply frightening. And as I say, the human nature to get back in the cab to try to put the brake on is is overwhelming. And so the other things that exacerbated this case was that there was an interlock mechanism which had been defeated, and which contributed to the accident. So the judge was very critical about attempts to blame the driver, their failure to know about the defeated interlocks. So the case in question there, it's all in the public domain. They were fined quite recent, I think, fined 1.5 million. So if you want the full details, you can have a look at that there. So just to pick up on again on the kind of human factors side of the driver getting back in the cab, if you don't have technical solutions to this, you are entirely reliant on people doing the right thing. And the two things there are to put the brakes on in the first place, but also to not react when the vehicle rolls away in the way that is their gut reaction to respond. And it's a real classic case of, even you might train people and people might know, but in the heat of the moment, their kind of base instinct takes over. So we really need a technical solution to this, but it's very complicated to actually to create something that's robust and reliable. So that's kind of, you know, for us and for industry to work on over the coming years. I should say also, it's not confined to waste and recycling. The transport sector has a lot of this as well. Okay. Right. So this last one is a proactive prosecution. So this colleagues in London, they had a Brittle report, which in itself was pretty amazing. They found pretty appalling conditions. So they got to site, all work stopped. Lots of migrant workers on site, all retreated to the shipping containers where they were actually living on the site. So the electrical installations, dreadful, dangerous parts of machinery. Can we get rid of that? Sorry, I can't. It's slightly obscured, so I can't actually see the slide here, and it's not going away. So the bay walls were seriously damaged and in unstable conditions. Waste piles unstable. They were close to walkways. Picking stations, the access and the egress ladders were structurally unsound, and the site office was resting on top of an air conditioning unit. I mean, having seen the pictures, it was pretty horrific. There was little or no segregation between vehicles and pedestrians to protect totters from plant and skip lorries. So for those of you who don't know, totting is kind of hand sorting of recyclables, and it's often done in close conjunction with plant and machinery. So anyway, so the upshot was that there were 9 prohibition notices and 7 improvement notices served, and in addition a Section 2 case which resulted in a £200,000 fine. Despite the fact that this was an appalling site, the off-site owners tried to claim that they had an exemplary safety record, which of course was given pretty short shrift by the judge. Okay, next please. Okay, so last the end of 2020 and 2021, So our work year follows the financial year. We carried out some inspections, about a total of 850. We didn't go to the sites there identified, so we targeted kind of mainstream waste and recycling. And the two focuses were machinery guarding and isolation and workplace transport. And the next slide shows what we found. So basically, 322 of the visits, uncontrolled risks. Sorry, that's our internal terminology, also known as material breaches as well. So some of those resulted in kind of letters to get remedial action done, but some resulted in notices. So there are about 154, so mostly INs, but also 41 PNs. So the breakdown of the INs there, so almost equal numbers of notices served on workplace transport and on machinery safety. Obviously that kind of reflects that those are the issues that people were looking at, but they were giving, they were kind of equally as equally as bad, as it were. Okay, so the most common types of hang on a minute. Yep, thank you. So the most common types of machine highlighted there, so balers, conveyors, shredders, and trommels. Now, one of the slightly alarming things I realised when I took over this role was that there actually was lots of draft guidance in preparation in relation to things like machinery guarding and machine-specific sheets, but actually it wasn't in the public domain. It hadn't been finished off and cleared. So we're making a big effort this year to do that, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Right, so what's the priorities for this year? So we've got 50 visits to anaerobic digestion this year. Last time we did this, we deliberately excluded farms where most of these are sat. This year we've decided to go to farms and to get an idea of what this technology looks like in a farming environment. This is slightly awkward for me because there's a different sector that looks after agriculture, so I have to kind of work quite closely with them to make sure that they're kind of happy and sighted on what we're doing. So that's going to be happening from about October onwards, October to March, and over the same time period we've got machinery safety. So that's 500 visits this year, hopefully, and as I said just now, the idea is that coincides with WISH issuing this suite of machinery safety guidance. Okay. So we've got lots of other priorities apart from those inspection issues that I've just mentioned. Health, dust, bioaerosols, stress, mental health. These are all tricky issues to deal with. The bioaerosols one, there is some WISH guidance which is kind of finalised, so that should be coming out in the next few months. So that will be particularly helpful for people who are operating compost sites. Stress and mental health is a big issue, but it's also a very difficult issue to deal with because operators or companies or organisations don't actually control the risk, because the risk is generally members of the public. So that's a difficult one, to which there are no easy answers. So we're spending a lot of time looking at future issues, technical changes, new processes, government policy, etc. So one of the things that's kind of becoming clear is there's a blurring of boundaries between waste and recycling and energy production. So, you know, two good examples there are anaerobic digestion and energy from waste. So this causes us a few issues internally, because we have a particular part of the organisation that deals with the energy sector. So, you know, we're asking ourselves questions about where some of this technology should actually sit. We've also got new technologies. I've highlighted enzymes recycling plastics. There's also, since I produced this presentation, and come across another technology for recycling plastics, which involves pyrolysis. Again, you know, we need to better understand what the issues and the risks are. Lithium-ion batteries, big issue, obviously. Big push for everybody to switch over to electric cars in the coming years, but of course that's going to mean the depleted battery packs eventually need recycling. So we're in early days with this at the moment. At the moment, pretty much all of that waste is shipped abroad. However, I'm aware that there's a couple of companies who are setting up plants to process some of the waste over here now. So I think Veolia and Glencore are certainly two that have been in the news recently, setting up plants to do this. The other thing that I'm doing is working very closely with our Net Zero Hub, and we're looking at circular economy issues as well. So all of these things are going on. So unfortunately, there's only me and the one person who currently works for me, plus all the volunteers that I can get from Wish and Switch and so on and so forth. So this is a lot of the work is being done kind of you know, around people's day jobs. So I think despite all of that, you know, we're generally achieving a lot for a pretty you know, relatively low input, as it were, because of that kind of collaborative working. Okay, next one. So some other priorities: workplace transport. So that's basically, that's on the site, but also during collection. We need, as I said, better control measures. Relying on people to do the right thing, not make mistakes, is kind of pretty weak, and it's low on the hierarchy of control. Rollaways I've kind of touched on. Yeah. Visibility. Colleagues of mine in the mechanical engineering discipline are hoping over the next 2 or 3 years to revisit BS 5006 in relation to kind of visibility issues. One of the things that was drawn to my attention, and I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it's really quite, I was amazed when I had a look at it. It's Transport for London's direct visibility standard. So what direct visibility means is not using mirrors and cameras. In other words, it's about redesigning the cab on RCVs, etc., so that the driver can see pedestrians and cyclists directly much more easily, and primarily that's by making the cab much lower, and you know, putting for example, vision panels in the lower parts of doors, etc. And if you go to that link and you go towards the bottom of the page, there's a video, and it's really well worth a watch. Now, in terms of how people are invisible in relation to cyclists, are invisible from the viewpoint of a traditional cab, and then you see the same scenario from the cab of one of these direct visibility standard vehicles, and the difference is just night and day. So this could actually have massive impacts. Though one of the things we are doing is looking at, excuse me, is looking at whether we can get get some buy-in to that from manufacturers as well. So we've yet to talk to them, but hopefully we'll get something positive from that front. Okay. So there's a big list of new and revised WISH guidance for release this year. So we've got walls, that's following the dreadful tragedy in Birmingham about 5 years ago. So that's bay walls or push walls, as they're often known. So that's about different types, how to manage, how to maintain them, and also to talk people through a bit of the design issue, some of the design issues as well. So I think that's long overdue. I think machinery guarding, we've already got what we published last year, the document on safe lock-off and isolation. We're now producing a companion document to that, which covers kind of machinery safeguarding. So it's not just guarding, but it's also competence and procedures and you know, all sorts of other aspects of how you organise your plant and machinery. And then below that, there will be between 6 and 8 lower level machine specific information sheets. Bioaerosols I've already mentioned, so there'll be a waste document and an info document, I think. Waste 13, that's designing and operating MRF, that's the revision, and waste 23 is a revision as well. There may be 1 or 2 others. It's honestly quite difficult to keep track of everything that's going on, but all of these things are really quite well advanced, and these should all be out later this year. The top ones, the top 3 particularly, they should be out in the next few months. Okay, so probably try for a few key messages here. Procurement, we believe there's a kind of bit of a window of opportunity here as organisations look and think about switching over to electric vehicles. We think it's really important to get the standards of these vehicles right now, because electric vehicles are expensive. That means that they might have a longer fleet life. So actually, if you buy vehicles which don't have the optimized cameras or mirrors and so forth, and you go and try and retrofit them, it costs 3 or 4 times as much than if you get it done in the first place. But also there might be opportunities here for manufacturers to deal with some of the issues like rollaways and handbrakes, etc., if they are configuring a completely new powertrain, which will operate in a different way. So the next point there is about process safety type thinking into running plant and equipment. So in other words, and this is partly where the human factors comes in, it's about looking at things from a systems point of view. It's about challenging yourself to think about what could go wrong and taking preventative measures in terms of design or procedures, etc., to prevent it from happening. So in the major hazard sectors, there are concepts like HAZOP, hazard operability study, which is a kind of fairly well defined and mature framework for looking at hazards and risks. And I think when if you're dealing with processes which create flammable gases, particularly, you really need to be kind of thinking about those risks in a much more robust way. So that's a bit of a challenge for people. Management of change, buying, installing new equipment, CDM implications. Every time you buy or install or change your process or your plant, you need to kind of revisit things like how is the electrical supply wired, and following on from that, isolation. So we've had a number of accidents over the years where people have made assumptions that hitting one e-stop would stop the entire line, but actually when new machines have been installed, they've been put on separate circuits, which means that you have to hit several e-stops or isolators in order to actually stop the entire line. So it's about thinking through the implications of change. Supervision, this is crucial to systems of work and procedures being followed, but it's a really difficult role for procedures, and supervisors need to have the right support, the right training, because they are no longer part of the team, one of the lads. They have kind of a foot in the management camp, as it were, and that can be quite a difficult role for people. Okay, yep, next. So I think we've come a long way in a relatively short period of time, but we've got lots of challenges for the future. I think hopefully those have been clear from, or you've got a bit of a flavour of what they are from what I've just said. So I said at the beginning about human factors, and I thought it'd be kind of useful just to kind of give you a couple of things to take away from this. So it's why do people fail and deviate from systems and procedures, is the first one. And quite closely linked to that is learning the right lessons from accidents. So what you should be doing is looking at systems and not blaming employees. So employees are part of the system, and they are often the part of the system that makes it work. So in other words, the system itself might be quite not particularly brilliantly designed, and many companies use employees to kind of to bridge gaps, to make links, to make things work smoothly, etc. Unfortunately, relying on people like that, they will make errors, and that might be due to all sorts of things like interruptions, or having to adapt because the correct piece of equipment is broken or unavailable, etc. So I think the key question when you're investigating an accident is to ask why people did what they did and try to understand where they were coming from, because I've met very few people who've done something what with hindsight is you would call silly or risky or reckless, who've done it for kind of reckless risk-taking reasons. They've usually done it because they're trying to get the job done in suboptimal circumstances. So whenever you see, and I don't know how many of you have done this, but human error in an accident investigation report is not the end point, it's the start point. Okay, you've got to be asking why people deviated or made a mistake or an error. And I think the other point, which is not on the slide there, is that 9 times out of 10, human error will be followed by more training. Well, that's only applicable if the person hasn't been trained and lacks knowledge. If the person could be very competent, but if they don't have the right equipment, or they're under ridiculous time pressures, or they're like the poor guy in the Baylor incident that we talked to, a Baylor case study that we talked about before, been put in an impossible position, you know, you're not going to fix the problem by more training. So last point on there is a little plug for a book that I think is great if you want to understand some of these issues. So Decker is a really interesting guy. He's an academic, but he was spent a lot of time writing about pilots and human error in flying, and he realized that probably the best way to understand this was to actually get his pilot's license. So he now has a really interesting job in that he spends part of his time as a commercial pilot and part of his time as an academic looking at human error and human factors. So and he's also on YouTube as well. So he's very engaging to listen to. I think that might be it. Any more questions? Yeah, that's it. So sorry, that was a very big, very fast gallop through about what we have done and what we're thinking about doing and what's coming down the pipeline. So hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if you've got questions. I've had the chat turned off because otherwise it's very distracting. So
thank you very much for that, Tim. That was very informative chat. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or stick your hand up, and we'll try and track who's asking questions. I would have to say, you know, I did notice that you'd said that 20 years ago there were 18 fatalities a year. I've been in the waste management industry for over 20 years, and I can see there have been huge improvements over the last 20 years. You know, it's drastically different from where it was, but there's obviously still a lot of things that, you know, are developing. There's a lot of improvements we can still make, and there's obviously a lot of work going on in the background to do that. I would say if there's anybody from SMEs on the call today, you can join the Switch Forum for support, switchforum.org. There's access to all the WISH documents through the Switch Forum as well, which we keep up to date regularly. So feel free to you know, join the Switch Forum. It's not restricted to people from Scotland. Anybody's welcome to join in and access the webinars and the information that's on the website.
Yeah. Yes, I think the other point, just to pick up on that, Gail, is that that those, you know, pre sort of 2000, there wasn't, you know, I think there was only a small amount of recycling going on. So in the last 20 years, the whole recycling part of it, the processing, which involves lots more machinery, lots more, you know, tools like or plant like, sorry, excuse me, like loading shovels. So that has massively increased the risk profile of the sector. So, and it's still causing problems, but actually despite that, so before, you know, 40 years ago, it was just collect the waste and stick it in a hole in the ground. And now we're doing so much more with it. And the more you do with it, with machinery and transport and so forth, the more risks there are. So to have actually achieved a general fairly decent slope on the reduction graph is actually pretty amazing. So yeah, okay.
It was all about the landfill and the vehicles when I started, but yeah, no, that absolutely has changed drastically. Right, Ewan Monroe has a question. He's wondering about the terminology of uncontrolled risk from the visit. Would this also be raised if a risk was controlled but in a very ineffective way?
Yes, probably. I think it's a case by case call, to be honest. It just depends on the circumstances, but yes, I think generally. I mean, you know, perhaps a good example of that is you might have procedures to control a risk, but you go around and you find out actually the procedures aren't being followed because nobody's actually enforcing it. So that might be an example where you've got the control measure, but it's just fallen into kind of disrepute or disrepair.
Yeah, absolutely. See, Nicola Holcroft has made a comment about management change being such a key issue, and she's going to revisit after this webinar, so that's good to see. We have got somebody with their hand up. Right, do you want to, I think you should have control to unmute yourself if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, my question is the uncontrolled risk DCEMAS hazard not identified?
Sorry, could you say that again? I'm just trying to.
No, my question is uncontrolled risk DCEMAS hazard not being identified? When you are doing a risk assessment, or if an incident occurred, you are investigating an accident or incident, you see root cause of, you come across hazard not identified. Is it the same as uncontrolled risk?
Right. Okay. I think. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, what I would say is I wouldn't get too hung up on this term uncontrolled risk. It's not something that, you know, I think yeah. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. Sorry, but yeah. Perhaps if you want to, happy for you if you want to take this offline. If you want to email me an example of what you mean, that might be the and then I can get back to you.
All right. I can send you an email if you on this. If I could get your email address, I could
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Then I will send it. So
okay. Yeah. So I tell you what, if you send it into possibly into Switch, and then they will send it to you, and I'll get back to you. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we've got somebody saying they're from a Salish, is it? From a process safety background, can't overemphasize the importance of human factors and hazard identification as well as maintenance and proactive safety inspections. Yep,
yeah,
definitely agree with that. Big thank you to all involved. Andrew saying to those in the waste sector keeping us going through COVID, impressed with the teams still collecting waste throughout. Must have been a big concern with transmission at the height of it. I think it's fair to say yes, that is definitely the case. Chloe saying very high level and slightly out of scope question, but can food businesses send waste to anaerobic digestion? The answer to that is definitely yes.
Yep.
And again, I can put you in touch with people if you want to email me directly, Chloe. My email address is gail@bio-capital.co.uk. If you want to email me, I can put you in touch with various people. Or the admin@switchforum.org.uk. Everything will get circulated from there if you want. Anybody got any other questions? No, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, I don't think. Chloe, if you want to just send it to the one that's already there, the admin@switchforum.org.uk, then it can be forwarded on to me. Right, I think that looks like it. That's it. Oh, hold on. What is AD? Anaerobic digestion is what AD stands for. So we're terrible in the waste management industry for using acronyms for absolutely everything. We kind of forget that not everybody knows what we're talking about. So yeah, anaerobic digestion is what we're talking about. The slides will be made available. The slides and the recording of the presentation will be made available, and I think emailed to everyone who's registered.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we're as bad as aviation for acronyms, though. I think
we do try, though.
We do, absolutely, and the civil service is just as bad, to be honest. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, from all the comments, there's loads of people that have found it very, very informative today, Tim. So I'd like to say a huge thank you for giving that presentation to us. It's the busiest webinar we've had by far. I think it's at least doubled our previous best. So well done. Thank you very much for that. That was really informative. You hold the record, Tim, so far.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
So yeah, huge thank you for that. If anybody's got any questions, after the presentation, then feel free to email that admin@switchforum.org.uk email address, and we'll try and get back to people, forward them on to Tim if you want to do that. But thank you very much for attending, everyone, and thank you very much to Tim.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.